I've got a confession to make.
I need to get this off my chest. As a business owner, we all make mistakes.
I've got to confess.
And we are live. Confessions of a Business Owner. So good to have you on the show once again, Kim. How you doing?
Doing super well, thank you, Charlie. Sir, how you doing?
Well, dude, I'm really excited. As we kind of mentioned before the show, I've got a new person starting on my team today, and I love it when I have a new team member starting because it's like the excitement of what they're going to be able to do. It's really, really cool.
Yes, we cannot wait to see, and I'm sure a topic of future episodes also.
Oh, definitely. But today we're going to get straight into it because this is a topic that cannot be ignored, and that is risk. And I almost can hear the piano, that dun 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 dun
dun. Guys, keep the eyes peeled. If you watch this video, we'll also then retarget you with a video of Charlie sliding around his jocks. But you have to watch all the way to the end, otherwise you won't get it.
Oh, teaser and a half right there. But this is a rather serious topic. Now, I've had a rather alarming few conversations. I won't name anyone on the show, but something that is becoming very, very clear to me is that some people just ignore risk and don't want to deal with it. And I can just see this is going to really, really, really hurt when something kind of goes wrong. So what I'm really hoping we can cover in this show is kind of like making risk something that the average business owner isn't going to glaze over or think that it doesn't apply to them or ignore, but actually be skilled enough where they can accept risk and learn how to deal with it.
Yes, 100%. As you said, it is a very important topic. So, it's going to be interesting to see how all the listeners or viewers feel at the end of this. So hopefully they can take it away and, do some actions with it as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll take you through this story because this is where it gets a bit interesting. So I was on a phone call with someone and we were just discussing some things about business growth and all the rest. And then as we were discussing one of this person's clients, they mentioned that this client was responsible for 65% of their income. So this one source of income, 65% of the business is relied around them. And not only that, is this person had mentioned that the relationship had begun to get a little bit shaky and they were getting a bit nervous. So I said, what happens if this person leaves? And basically, I'll just straight out drop it. They said, we're fucked. And I said, how long have you had this one client responsible for this amount of income? And they said, a good 2 years. And I said, like, at any point over these 2 years, did you feel like it would have been a good idea to like maybe get some other clients or do something to maybe like mitigate this risk or have some sort of prevention in place so you didn't have this type of stress? Because it was keeping him up at night. Like he was literally saying he was starting not to sleep. And he goes, I thought about it, but then, we got so busy doing the work and then, we're having a really good time with this client. I just kind of never got around to it. And I said, was it worth it? Like you're at this point now where you're not sleeping. The relationship is rocky. Like, was it worth ignoring? And he said, absolutely not. This is something where I'm like, I really regret it now. And I'll bet there's someone out there listening to this podcast that is already going, oh, obviously that's not a great idea. One source of income for 65% of the business. But the story gets better. As we're going through things, I noticed another kind of risk, if you will. So 65% of the income coming from one client, risk number one. But then risk number two was platform reliance. So this person was essentially running majority of their business through Facebook and relying on Facebook. And I was like, what happens if Facebook disappeared overnight? Or I really don't believe Facebook will disappear overnight. So let's just remove that. But let's pretend, what if Facebook changed their terms and conditions, which they do quite regularly? And the way you're operating your business, you couldn't do it like that anymore. What happened then? He goes, straight up, well, we'd be fucked again. And I'm like, how long have you been doing this? And he goes, at least a year. And I go, at no point in the year did you have any of those concerns. And the reply was a bit different. It was like, well, Facebook's just bulletproof. Like we're not really worried about, Facebook going anywhere. I'm like, oh, interesting. Really, really interesting. And then I said, has anything changed on Facebook like since you've been on the platform? And he goes, Well, actually, we used to get quite a lot of leads from it as well, but that's kind of changed also. And again, it becomes more and more fascinating that when I spoke to this person, it was quite clear that they'd gotten so busy doing the work that this had become something that they were just too busy to deal from again. And that was like, when you've got one risk, that's like a multiple, but when you've got two, it's like you're just increasing the chances of your business not being around tomorrow, like more and more again. But the story gets better.
Well, I'm on the edge of my seat here, Charlie. I don't know if I can handle much more.
So I said, well, this is where things get interesting as well. This person, the way they're operating their business is from a negative cash flow cycle, meaning they bill someone after they've done the work. So just to really make that clear, a really good example of a negative cash flow cycle is a real estate agent. A real estate agent will run around and sell a house, and they don't actually get paid in many cases until the property settles. So they will do all this work before they get paid. If you have a positive cash flow cycle, you get paid before you do the work, or you increase the cash before goods and services are delivered. Anyway, not to sidetrack it, back onto the story. So this person does billing after the month. Now, the obvious client that was getting a bit rocky and the work had changed, he noticed that they were starting to pay their bill late as well and starting not to pay things on time or starting to question things on the invoice. And I said, well, have you got cash to float you through? Like, if let's pretend this client leaves, have you got enough cash reserves to pay your team and invest in some marketing so you can bring in some new clients? And the answer was no. And I couldn't help it. And I said, well, what happens if this client leaves? How long can you keep the doors open? Or how much time do you have to find another client? And I would have loved to have heard months. I would have loved to have heard something like 3 months, 6 months, something like that, because that's a reasonable amount of time to find a new client or reassess how you do things. But it was a few weeks. And in the way that they operate from a negative cash flow cycle, even if they got a new client, it would still be a bit of time before they got paid. And I'm like, I'm sitting on the edge of this phone call and I'm like, I'm really not, like, I started to feel anxious for them. I really, really did. And at this point, because things were already rocky, they weren't in a position where they could suddenly start saving more cash flow or hedging against it in any way. So now we've got 3 risks. We've got 3 really big inevitable risks. Like, would you be sleeping at this point?
No, definitely not. It's just, as you say, like it's a scary one, especially when you have that conversation. You're like, oh, when you feel worried about it, you're like, oh, how are they sleeping? Considering that it's not even my business, and I'm already feeling worried about it.
Well, the further I get into business, the more I value sleep at night factor.
Yeah.
I really, really do. Like, the ability to sleep well at night is just so valuable to me. I don't want the stress of situations like this. But the story gets better. I said to him, I'm like, dude, you are really stressed and not sleeping. Can you take a day off? Like, maybe take a couple of days off, really think about what we've discussed here and these risks and all the rest, and like have a think about how you want to address things from these clients. And he then said, I can't. And I'm like, why not? I'm like, do you have the weekends off? Like, what's going on? He goes, well, everything in the business needs me to function. Like, if I have a couple of days off, that means we effectively stop and the team won't have things to do. And I'm like, so you're telling me, like, on top of all of what we've spoken about right now, you have key man risk. Like, you can't take some time off or take in another sources. I'm like, this is just no fun at all. Like, this is the point where it's like I really started to feel for this person, because to a degree they had actually been successful. Like, they've been running a business for a number of years. It had been growing, many things going on, but just very, very negligent on the risk. Now, unfortunately, this story is just way, way too common. Way, way too common. And this conversation on the phone actually led me to the point where that's what inspired this podcast episode, because I'm hopeful that someone will actually listen to this episode and relate to what I've just gone through there, and hopefully do something about it before this moment kind of happens from there. So Kim, what's it been like for you dealing with risk? Like, is this something you've put some conscious effort into?
Well, again, I've kind of had the benefit of like previous jobs, seeing like, again, I'm not someone who just started on an online business and did that. Like, I've worked in accounting firms, IT companies, grain trading companies, and all of them had versions of this risk built into it as well. So I was probably more beneficial than some in being able to see this and going, well, like we had to go and take out key man insurance and all this sort of stuff, and we had to assess all these risks, and we had many similar ones as well. And the old, as I said, grain trading company would be similar, and that whole business was built on risk because you put grain into a 40-foot sea container and then you send it off, and when it hits the port, you get paid. So you don't pay the supplier, you haven't got the money there, and you put it out onto the ocean where, things can happen, and you wait till it gets to the other side for it to arrive.
Well,
So you
pirates
talk about,
are a real thing, let's be honest.
no, there has been and because you think of all the big shipping lines, like there is legitimacy of pirates, there is legitimacy of freak waves, there is legitimacy of sending to a country, and maybe people like we used to deal with people in Vietnam, but they were actually operating out of China. And then if they try and take stuff across to China, well, there's a whole bunch of other risks there. And I remember hearing one story where what happened was the supplier, the person who was meant to come and, the receiver who was meant to come and receive it, disappeared from the face of the earth for about a year. They were going from Vietnam to China, and they just disappeared with a shipment of close to $1 million on the water. So you want to talk about scary risk? That is I've seen them big ones like that, where it's just like you literally go, I understand now why when my old boss had a shaved head. It's like you couldn't stop pulling all your hair out. That's the only way to alleviate it.
Well, what an education. But I think even the more obvious ones would be like currency risk, because you could literally lock in a profit.
So we did two different things, and it's a really good idea as well. So let's just say that you're dealing with the USA and Australia, and we do that as well, right? However, we don't have probably as big a contracts. So we would have $200,000, like $50,000 to $200,000 contracts go out. So we had to take out a Forex contract. A lot of suppliers, like the actual people that we purchase from, they would also do their own marketing overseas. They wouldn't take out Forex covers. They would just kind of go, well, if it goes up, we benefit. If it goes down, we lose. So we always had to lock ours in. So every day I had to look at the Forex covers and go, well, and you could sometimes close them out. It's like a little bit like we would maximum in our books be allowed to close out like 10%. So we would be able to basically offset or gamble it. So we would take out a cover, go, cool. If it went up, we'd be like, oh, can we close this out? We'll get paid out a profit. And then we take out a new cover at this rate, and we're still profitable here. So there's a lot of juggling, but we were one of the few that actually took out covers, and we had to deal with the Forex teams. But a lot of other people, they wouldn't. And then they would go, cool, well, same, even let's just say you did a website build, and you build someone $20,000 for a website in the US, and you got paid at the end of the contract. The currency could have dramatically fluctuated from what you said it was going to be worth. It could be worth double, it could be worth half, because if you're translating that back to your local currency. But again, it's something that probably, I would guess, a lot of people online would probably not even think about, not even take into consideration that again is another risk for them.
It can make a massive difference in my business. Like, obviously, outsourcing Angel, we have a lot of staff in the Philippines. We're dealing with pesos, and so if that rate moves in the Philippines or in the US, it dramatically affects my business. We do have currency risk, and how much profit we make can depend largely on what's happening in the markets. So, that's a really good one that I think especially a lot of Australian businesses, with the amount of US tools we buy, all the subscriptions, you can notice your costs creep up dramatically if the US dollar moves. But I want to ask you a question on that then. Why do you feel that most business owners don't take risk seriously or deal with risk?
Yeah. I mean, I think some of the main ones, I feel like sometimes people put on cash goggles, which is where it's like, you put your goggles on, it's like, oh, but this client is so good and we're just making all this money together. And it's not convenient, nor is it I won't say happy, but it's not a good feeling to try and assess it. Because in any situation, you always want a positive outcome. And if it's positive, I always find that people go, well, the old never hat. It's like, oh, it could never change. These guys are always going to be awesome. This is always going to happen this way. And it's never going to change. Whereas as you said, because I've seen a lot of stuff, and I see, especially in WA, so many companies that have had contracts with mines that have shut down and things like that and just not got paid. like it becomes really, really inherent for me. And I'm like, okay, we always pay attention to these, like where these risks may lie. And I can't remember if it was we talked about it or on one of these earlier podcasts, but it's like where you kind of design the divorce before the marriage, where you go, okay, like I get it, we're going to do this, but if everything goes wrong, because as well, like I've just had so many people come into me lately, similar things, or a couple of guys that are going into partnership together. I'm like, cool, have you designed the divorce? And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, well, what happens in 6 months' time if they're not doing the work, you're doing all the work, or whatever it may be? Like, what happens then? They're like, oh, yeah, we haven't really thought about that. I'm like, well, in every case, it's like, as you said, same with like lead generation or anything like that. Like, you need to design, like, if today everything got shut down, like if you're divorced from this, this person, this interaction, whatever it may be, what's the outcome? How do you kind of solve that? And if you don't do that, well, it's like you leave yourself literally up a creek, we all know that creek, shit creek, and there's no paddle to get back down.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. For me, I feel like when it comes to this topic is like risk is not a fun topic. It's not fun to learn about. It's not fun to deal with. Just like accounting, just like bookkeeping. So it's like, for a lot of business owners, and this is the big one, it doesn't necessarily have an impact if you don't deal with it today. So it's like, it's not urgent.
But as well, I was going to say, like, you don't, like, again, there is no, like, I have many books here. There's no, like, here is your business book on all the business things you need to know. As I said, if I didn't have somewhat exposure to it previously, would I have that even in my scope of awareness? Would I even know that it's something that I needed to consider? Maybe, maybe not. Like, so, I think as well, as you say, it has a level of unimportance, but as well, probably a lot of level of unawareness. Like, if you tell people, like, do you have key man insurance? They're like, key man? What is that word? Like, what does that mean?
Where can I hire one? Who's this key man? I need key people for my team.
They just see a lock in the sky and it's like a shining light. There's key man.
Absolutely. Oh, look, even let's be real. It's like books on marketing and sales and business strategy and fast growth. They do well. Businesses on the unattractive side, like risk, I can't see, cracking any Amazon bestsellers. Unless risk becomes its own category, then maybe.
I reckon the picture of you sliding in your underwear, tired of risky business, I feel like we got a bestseller. I'm co-promoter. I'm happy to go on that one.
We'll put it as our mission. But it's a really fascinating one from there. And it's kind of like it falls into that category when I look at it and go, what needs to change where more small businesses will, really start taking this stuff seriously? And I think awareness is going to be the first step. And that's what I'm hoping we will achieve on this podcast.
Yeah. And I think it's, as you say, it's so important because, like, again, we talk about probably a lot of unsexy things on here. And, they may or may not have the most viewed episodes, but at least we're putting it out there so people can, because I know a lot of people go back and listen to the episodes from when we start, and like we literally are like pulling back the curtain and going, you need to think about these things, even if we don't get many listens or views on that one particular, who knows, this could be the best or the worst, but at least we're telling people about it.
Well, I kind of go further. Is like, if we help one person from this episode, worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Job done.
All right. So what I want to do is I want to, in this episode, go over the 5 types of risk I see most commonly and the ones that I think a lot of people will relate to and need to start to be aware of. So I'm going to dig into them one by one. So the first one we've already discussed a little bit is concentration risk. And a really good example of this is when more than 25% of your revenue comes from a single source. So if, this client or person was to go, then it's a very, very, big deal that it impacts the business impacts the business in a big way. Another reverse of this is the supplier side of things. So if you've got one supplier that supplies all the products to your business, so let's pretend we're a company that sells cups, and we get all our cups from one company. If they go out of business, we don't have any other way to get our product. So concentration risk. The second one I'm going to go through is obsolescence risk. And the best examples of these, it's very self-explanatory when you use the example, is Kodak or Blockbuster. So when new technologies come around, like the internet, like I dare say crypto is going to be, like mobile phones have been, or smartphones. It's like if you refuse to adapt to where technology is clearly overtaking or be stubborn about it, then you can go out of business. And like Kodak's the best example of this, because they were such a big company and they actually invented the digital camera. But because they made such a fortune selling chemicals for film and producing it, they didn't want to adapt. I'm sure someone regrets that in a big way, and the board would love to vote differently if they looked back. The next one is keyman risk. So keyman is when something relies on a single person in the business. So if you, as the business owner, if you have to show up every day for work to happen, you are the keyman risk in the business. Or maybe you have a talent or a hire on someone on your team and they're the only person that can do that certain job. So to reduce that one, it's really interesting that I kind of look at and go like two people have to be able to do everything in a business. Otherwise it's a job. It's not a business. It's pretty good one there. The next one I want to go into here is financial risk. And when I say financial risk, what I'm talking about is cash reserves. So I know it's a really good saying from a book I recently read by Keith Cunningham. And he kind of said is that, you know, most business owners are trying to make profit, but you can't actually pay your bills with profit. You can't actually, you know, go and say, would you take some profit? Like most places I go take cash. So when you kind of look at that in reflection and go, oh, hang on, you know, cash is the thing that's really important. So having a good cash reserves to get you through hard times or to hedge against if risk happens is just such a huge one for me. Cash solves problems. I'll be real. Like you can get out of a lot of trouble with cash. And then the last one, but certainly not the least one I want to go from here, is platform risk. So I'll tell you what, I've seen many SaaS companies come and go over the years, many, Kim. And I've seen even more change the way they do business. So a really good example of these ones is like, I'll use Facebook as an example. If your whole business relies on Facebook, you may not be concerned with Facebook going out of business, but I think you should be very worried that they change the way they do business or change features. Like how many things have they changed over the last few years is just astronomical. A really good example of this, if you're in the crypto space and your business relied on Facebook, it's like they put a ban flat out on that category. And then they put an unban. It's like you just don't have that control. And the other one is Google. I'll also say that a lot of businesses run proprietary softwares and things within it. It might be for their bookkeeping. It might be a CMS for their website. But, you know, if that goes down, it's like, you know, what's the real cost of exposure in not being able to do that? Facebook might be your entire source of lead generation at the moment. I know that's not uncommon, or Google might. If that was to go, like your front end of your business is just out of there. So that is the 5 types of risk that I most commonly see. And I think we're even going to be a little bit cheeky here and go, Kim, this is the end of part 1 of this episode. So this is part 1 on risk, and we will be back to you soon with part 2.